welcome to the Rime Buddhist Center's Dharma Talk podcast, Achieving Peace Through Compassion. This podcast is a recording of the Dharma Talks given during our Sunday service.
Today, the topic of my Dharma Talk is relative bodhicitta, which Khenpo Lodrö in this book, Power of Mind, I call him KLT. KLT calls this the awakened heart. The awakened heart. And so if you're new to this, you're going to learn the term bodhicitta for the first time, and that's pretty fun. But before I talk about bodhicitta, I want to talk about the problem we're identifying that bodhicitta is supposed to solve, the problem, okay? And so this is a quote from Tokme Zangpo. Tokme Zangpo was a famous Tibetan Buddhist teacher, and he wrote a text called The 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva. And he said this, and this really resonates with me. He says, all suffering without exception comes from wanting to find happiness for oneself. Perfect enlightenment comes from wanting to find happiness for others. The root of all suffering is our intense clinging to the idea of our identity, what we call the self, and the extreme attachment to that self, what we call selfishness, which leads to afflictive thoughts and emotions. So when we talk about bodhicitta, that's the situation we're in that we're trying to solve. And I think, some people struggle with anger. Some people struggle with patience. Some people struggle with focus. My name's Daniel. I struggle with selfishness. Okay. And if you think I'm not the most selfish person that's because I work on it to varying success. It's honesty day. So selfishness is my struggle. And bodhicitta, we are told here, is the antidote to that struggle. And it's what I personally really need. And maybe that resonates with some of you and maybe it doesn't, but selfishness is my lifelong struggle. I find it very easy to be selfish and to fall into those traps. So now I'm going to read to you KLT's definition of bodhicitta, okay? He says, and I quote, bodhicitta is the consummate kind heart. It is the ground from which all positive qualities and insights grow, the springboard for our spiritual journey. The entire path of realization depends on developing bodhicitta. So another way to say that is he's saying our whole path can be developing this awakened heart. And that we've had a visiting teacher named Lama Lena who came through to the Rime Center. Often she comes through, but she once said that to me and it meant a lot to me. She said, the open heart can be the whole path. The open heart can be the whole path. And I'm going to read you, I hope you don't hate quotes because I'm going to read you one more. Patrul Rinpoche, he's a renowned Buddhist saint from Tibet. And he wrote a text called Words of My Perfect Teacher, which 5 stars, highly recommend. But he said this, he said, if you have bodhicitta, bodhi will be attained. If you don't have bodhicitta, bodhi is far away. May the unmistaken seed of enlightenment, bodhicitta, be born in my being. Bodhi is enlightenment or awakened wisdom. Okay, so he's saying this awakened heart is so important that if you don't have it, you're going to have problems. You're going to have problems. And I want to share with you Lama Rod Owens, who wrote the book, The New Saints, and he's pictured on our shrine over here. But he defines bodhicitta in a really down-to-earth way. And I'm not going to swear up here, but in his book, he says, giving an S is bodhicitta. Giving an S, right? And I think if you're in a helping profession or you do a lot of volunteer work, you know that if you stop giving an S, you're in trouble. Right? You have to. And compassion fatigue is real. It can be hard to keep doing it. Right? But you've got to keep doing it in that kind of profession or else it's going to be a problem for somebody, right? For you or for somebody else. So giving an S is another way to think about it if we want to. But I thought about asking Lama Matt if I could swear up here and I didn't ask. I didn't want to. So where am I going with this? So I'm gonna define one more word for you, and it is solidarity. And that is a word we talk about in the labor movement. I'm part of the labor movement, and we talk about this word solidarity. And it reminds me of bodhicitta but it's defined, and I got the actual definition. It's defined as unity or agreement of feeling or action, especially among individuals with a common interest, mutual support within a group. And we say in the labor movement, we say solidarity is love in action. Solidarity is love in action. I think bodhicitta is love in action too. So that being said, what do we do though? How do we cultivate this? And these practices we did today, Tonglen and Meta practice, these are ways to cultivate bodhicitta. And I used to think, when I first came to the Rime Center way back in 2009, wow, and I learned about Tonglen practice and I started doing it, I had negative thoughts around it. I thought, like, does this do anything? Right? And it's, for the record, I don't think Tonglen, like, I don't think I magically pull away someone else's suffering. I think what I'm doing is changing myself, nurturing those seeds of compassion and love that, again, I feel, because I struggle with selfishness, I feel those are sometimes lacking in me. So Tonglen, I used to think, why am I doing this? I used to think it's even Tonglen for myself. I think, okay, but I did it, right? I did it week after week after week at the Rime Center. And, you know, do you ever hear like a jar fills with one drop of water at a time or whatever? Or if you've, well, gosh, this will be lost on everyone, but in this film, Return of the Living Dead, there is a metal container that has zombie gas in it. And this dude bangs on it every day. And one day there's a hole in it and then really bad stuff happens, right? And our experience can be like that. So we can just do these practices again and again and again and sort of fake it till you make it, maybe. And so I'm going to share with you now. So I used to think these practices were kind of silly. I used to think they didn't really do anything. And back in 2020, I was in Washington, D.C., and I went to visit this place called the Washington Buddhist Vihara. And this was March of 2020, by the way. The time might matter for that. I don't know if I have any historians here, but some stuff happened that year. But I went to the Washington Buddhist Vihara because I wanted to meet this famous Theravada Buddhist teacher named Bhante Dhammasiri. And the Washington Buddhist Vihara is the oldest Theravada Buddhist temple in America. And I thought, all right, I'm going to go. You know, I don't really like these heart practices that much. Really, I don't even like other people that much. So I'm going to go to Bhante Dhammasiri and I'm going to learn like some real, like enlightenment focused, like mental powers. That's what I wanted to learn from him. So I go there and I meet him, and he's an old man from Sri Lanka. Really, really good English though, because he had lived in the United States many years. But I go to him and I ask him for a teaching. And I'm expecting like I'm going to get some like powerful concentration practice, right? I'm going to learn something I can't learn anywhere else. And he taught me metta practice. So he taught me another heart opening practice. And, you know, I'm going to tell a story about the Buddha in a little bit. One thing people say about the Buddha is that he could just see a person and know what kind of teaching they needed, right? You don't always know what kind of teaching you need, but hopefully a teacher does. So that's one thing that's said about the Buddha. And I think Venerable Bhante Dhammasiri, I think that is one skill he had with me, was looking at me and knowing I was wrong about what kind of teaching I needed. Okay. And so that was March of 2020. And like, I remember on the airplane coming home, I saw somebody in a mask and I thought, well, that's weird. And anyway, I got home, and then that's when I learned I'm not an introvert, because the whole world went into lockdowns and stuff. You guys remember, right? So I was then isolated. And after about 3 days, I was like, okay, this is enough. But so that's when I realized, oh, no, I need to see other people. This is not working. And I had my family with me, but still I was like, oh, this is not okay. And then I had a health scare, and I'm telling you, I had a health scare. I had to get my heart checked for something. And I'm telling you that because it was 2020, a very long time to see a doctor. So I knew I had signs of a problem in my body, and I had to wait 8 months to see a doctor to find out if it was big or little, Okay. So I've got the anxiety of isolation, and I've got the anxiety of this health condition, potential health condition. And so I was really stressed out. And so I started doing that metta practice. And it helped. And thankfully I was okay. I'm going to live for a while, but that metta practice carried me through, and it was not the practice that I thought I needed. Okay. So I'm going to tell you a story that Bhante Dhammasiri shared with me when he shared with me metta practice. And this is the story of where that comes from. Okay. I've told this story up here before because it's my favorite. Okay. So if you've heard it from me before and you didn't like it, I'm sorry. But this is the story. That's the story behind the text is called the Metta Sutta. And I'm going to read it to you because it's real short, but I'm going to tell you the context for it first, because the context for it to me is really important, and it is related to bodhicitta. So the story is, people would go to the Buddha in his time and they would just say, hey, the Buddha, what should I do? And then he would tell them what to do. Okay. So this group of monks went to the Buddha and they said, hey, what should we do? And he said to them, go meditate in that forest over there. Okay. So they were like, okay, great. So they go and they meditate in this forest, and they've set this intention to be sitting there day and night for 24 hours. Okay. And it gets dark. And when it gets dark, it gets kind of spooky, and they start to hear weird sounds. And, if you've ever been camping, that sometimes you hear weird sounds and maybe you never figure out what they are. I'm imagining, because I'm Gen X, I'm imagining if you're familiar with the film, The Blair Witch Project, these college students go camping in the woods, and at first it seems like they might be imagining things. And then a little bit later, not so much. That's what I imagine, these monks, right? So they start hearing things, and one of them gets the idea, or they all get the idea, that this forest is haunted. Okay. And now if your friend comes to you and says, hey, I was camping and the forest was haunted, you might be like, okay. But back then, hauntings, everybody believed in that sort of thing. So these monks, they go to the Buddha and they say, hey, this forest is filled with ghosts and I think they're going to kill us. We can't meditate there. Okay. And so the Buddha knows exactly what teaching they need. Okay. So he tells them, okay, I'm going to give you this teaching. I'm going to give you this practice, and you're going to go back to the woods and the ghosts are not going to hurt you. Okay. So he gives them the metta practice that we did today. And he also gives them the Metta Sutta, this text. And I'm just going to read it to you. And you may think, how does that help with ghosts? But don't worry, I'll tell you. So here it is, the Metta Sutta. This is what the Buddha says to them. They memorize it. So when they go in the woods, they're thinking about this teaching and reciting it. Okay. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. End quote. So that not born again part, that means attain enlightenment. Not born again means attain enlightenment. So these monks have this teaching and they've memorized it and they're reflecting on it and they're reciting it and they're doing metta practice. And lo and behold, they are not bothered by creepy sounds or by ghosts. And they go back to the Buddha and they tell him it worked. And there's more than one way to interpret this. And I'm going to tell you the interpretation I don't like first. Don't like, that's a weird way to say that. The interpretation I don't prefer first, and then I'm going to tell you the interpretation I love. So one interpretation is that the ghosts, they see these monks generating all this love, and they're moved, and they decide to leave them alone. And that's good. That's a good interpretation. But the interpretation that I like is that the ghosts were not real. And so these monks were so busy cultivating love and thinking about a better world and thinking about kindness and generating these feelings that they didn't have time in their minds to make up things that weren't real. They didn't have the mental energy because they were too busy generating love. They were too busy thinking about being good people. And it reminds me of, there's a dieting strategy I've heard about where you just like add a bunch of vegetables to your diet and you don't take anything away, right? And the theory behind that is, if I've just had a bowl of broccoli, I'm probably not grabbing the chips. Probably not. Maybe though. But that's what it reminds me of. If I'm spending all this mental energy generating positivity, generating love and compassion for others, then maybe I don't have time to worry about things that are not real problems, worry about things that are not real problems, or even to worry about things that are real problems, that where worrying doesn't help. Like when I was worried about my health condition, waiting 8 months to see a doctor, worrying about it didn't do anything, right? But trying to do metta practice and reflecting on this teaching, then I have something else to occupy myself, something good, right? So there is I'm going to close with this. There is a famous Buddhist historical figure named Atisha, and Atisha would often say to people, "Did you remember to develop a kind heart today?" He would often say that to people. And then often when people would leave, he would say, "Hey, don't forget, develop a kind heart." And so I think we all need to remember to develop a kind heart. So that's it for today. Thank you for taking the time to be here, and I love you all.
Thank you for listening to the Rime Buddhist Center's Dharma Talk podcast. Music was provided by Barefoot Bran Music. Please consider supporting the Rime Buddhist Center by making a donation at our website at www.rimecenter.org/donate.